Hey, Cash, I'm excited to interview you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Good, good, hanging in there.
Awesome.
So, why don't we start? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your role and what you do at Zibtek?
Sure. Let me tell you a little bit. So Zibtek, we're a software services company. Um, we've been in business for about 8 or 9 years now. It really came about out of a acquisition story. So I was the tech co-founder of a company, and while we were building that organization, we started to work with a lot of talent overseas and tried to figure out, how to leverage that talent. I had previously worked for a company called ACS, and they were a massive organization. They had like 750 locations. And so I had worked with a bunch of international folks and, found a lot of smart, great people all over the world to work with.
Yeah.
But it worked really well for large organizations, and we weren't sure how well it would work for a very, very small, nimble organization. So we started to kind of figure out what that pattern might look like, what the processes would look like, what the communication cycles would look like as we built that startup. And so that startup was acquired. I moved out to California for a little while. The startup was acquired, and then I came back to Utah, which meant basically me and the team were available. And so we were looking around the marketplace. We thought we'd probably build another product. But when I talked to a lot of people about their experience, like, hey, have you worked with folks either in Russia or India or China or whatever? Um, Most people were having a very difficult experience. And I had just kind of come off this run where we had spent 5 or 6 years building this product and getting it acquired. And it was just a lot of fun and we had a good time. And I had traveled back and forth and brought people out to the States and, had a really, really good group of people together. So since people were having a hard time with it and they were finding it difficult and we were having this awesome experience, we decided to then start offering services to the marketplace saying, hey, how can we help you more effectively leverage international talent? And so that's really where Zibtek was born, was from that acquisition. We were free, and so we started offering services. And so Zibtek is just, software services company. We have an office in Draper, Utah. We have some folks in Texas. We also have, and then we have an office in Bangalore where we have our engineering talent, where we do the principal engineering. And so I was the founder of Zibtek, and then the kind of one that brought that vision to life. And so it's been a lot of fun. We really enjoy it.
That's awesome. So, I want to start kind of at the beginning. So, imagine that you are somebody who needs software development. Like,
Yep.
walk me through that process. What do you think some of those problems are going to arise when you're somebody who's like, I've got this idea, but like, what are the problems that are going to, what am I going to run into that I need to solve?
Yeah, so there's a couple of options, there's a couple ways to go, right? And I kind of break it down to a few categories. One, you can just hire full-time employees that are software engineers, right? You can set up an Indeed post, you can, do that. There's obviously a commitment to that. There's kind of a longevity with like having a full-time employee. There's
Yeah.
override with taxes, computers, office space, all of those things. A lot of our customers still do that. They have some people and they kind of augment that team with us because they want some people to sit really close to them. And then some people just hire us to kind of go end to end and do the full thing, whether it's QA, deployments, engineering, the whole thing. So you can go the full-time route. That's one way to go. The second way to go is you can look for freelancers. And so freelancers are a little bit more like, hey, I'm doing my regular job, but I can help you with some software in the evening. And they usually charge, on an hourly basis.
Okay.
And the challenge is that they have very limited time. And so when
Yeah.
people come to us and they're like, oh, we're just struggling, it usually comes down to the fact that they can't quite get the product developed because it typically takes more effort than that person has, or it's moving so slow,
Yeah.
right? But then you can find someone who's trusted and who's a friend and who's, maybe they will work for equity or something like that. So there's kind of that model. And then there's like, I'm going to go find a company, which would be more like Ziptech. And there's companies that are local that are just US only. There's companies who do kind of like us, a little bit of hybrid, where they use some international talent and they have some local presence. And then you've also got companies who, are just completely overseas, right? And so those are kind of the different models you can come across when hiring a company. I would say, so I'll kind of not focus on maybe the full-time employee or the freelancer, but just like the company portion of how to
Yeah.
get software done. So you can get your project done with a company. I would say some of the biggest challenges we run into when people come to us, and this is just since I haven't really but now they're
Been
hiring a
on the
bunch of
other
our
side.
competitors. I'll tell you what people are telling us when they come to us and why they're frustrated. I would say the biggest challenge that we hear is that people will come into the engagement, and most business owners, especially if you've never developed software before, they have this expectation that it might work a little bit closer like building a deck in your backyard, right? It's like,
Yeah.
well, how many 2x4s is it, and how many this, and how many that, and how much cement? And so they think that you're going to be able to very, very precisely just bring out a tape measure, and like in 20 minutes, you're going to know like the exact cost of this deck. And software just really doesn't work like that fundamentally. And so what we found is that people come to us very frustrated, and because they're trying to mentally get into a very fixed bid kind of model,
Yeah.
they're having a very hard time with the company they're working with. And sometimes those companies will give you a very fixed bid model. They're very confident, they're overconfident in saying, I promise this is going to be
Yeah.
$50,000, this is going to be $100,000. So fundamentally, they're in this relationship where that's not how software is built. That's not how great products are built. And so both of them are going to be very frustrated. The company will probably come into it and say, hey, if they're overconfident or they're being that way, it's because they're just trying to win business in the marketplace.
Yeah.
They know it's not really going to work like that, or sometimes they'll undercut that bid and just get you in the door. And then they're constantly giving you the change order business, like, oh, that's
Yeah.
out of scope, that's out of scope, that's out of scope. So now you're in a very argumentative relationship instead of like a creative relationship where you're trying to build something. And I would say software, although it's called an engineering practice, it's like software engineering. I would say it's much more creative than most engineering practices, whether it's electrical engineering or anything like that, civil engineering. So because software is a creative process, you really want to be in a relationship with your engineers that is very, very communicative, and it's very open in your communication. And so putting in some of those things that's like really strict and really difficult is going to make the relationship not work. And it's not going to actually be, it's not whether it's good for you or it's good for the business owner, it's good for your engineers. It's really what's best for the product.
Yeah.
And great products are really just not born out of an adversarial relationship, right? We
Yeah.
have we haven't seen Instagram born out of that. We haven't seen Facebook born out of that. We don't see YouTube born out of like a really adversarial
Intention.
relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So when somebody is coming, it sounds to me like when you're coming to a software development company and you're curious and you want to know if you should hire them, it's kind of like an interview process. You want to find the right company, and the company wants to make sure you're the right client, and like you want that
yep.
to be a harmonious thing. So in your opinion, what do you think some of the top questions they should be asking their software development company?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if I were coming to someone, I would ask them some questions really around, because like you said, it's really, you're trying to build something that's kind of harmonious, something that they really get your vision. And so I would ask some questions. One, I would really ask about their communication patterns. So
Okay.
as we engage, what's that going to look like? Does that mean that we're going to get an email once a week? Does that mean we're going to get on a phone call twice a week? Does that mean, like, what is our communication cycle and patterns, and what does that look like? I would really explore that and see
Okay.
if that fits, one, what you're comfortable with, but also the best way for you to understand what's happening in the process and contribute to the process. So I would ask that. The other thing I would dig a lot into is like, what is the process for getting work ready for engineers? And so we spend actually a lot of time in that, writing user stories. And some people maybe haven't done that yet. And so we can chat more about what that is, but you're writing down user stories, which it's not just clear requirements. Some people are like, well, that's like your blueprints for your house. And it is, but it isn't, right? It is trying to get down to the level of detail that a blueprint would, but user stories inherently are even more exploratory and fluid. So you'll write, as a user, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And then inside of that, you're writing usually like really in-depth 10 to 15 acceptance criteria. So the only way this unit of work is going to be accepted is if it meets these things. And some of those are really functional, and they're just like, on the page, I should be able to do this. Or when I click sort, it should go from A to Z. Or it could be really basic stuff, a user, but there also, your engineering team should add to that acceptance criteria and putting bounds on like, performance or bounds on the page speed should not be more than 2 seconds or whatever it is, right? Those are just things that your engineers should also come up with and contribute to the process and add that acceptance criteria. We also do a thing inside of there where we're getting ready for engineering work. We actually have our QA also be a part of those conversations, and they help in the planning sessions of writing great user stories, because they're also the ones that are going to catch things, and they're the ones that know things. So we move everybody into that planning meeting and spend a lot of time in that. So we found that getting work ready is one of the most critical steps to making sure that you're getting what you want, and also exploring the creative avenue, because now you have everybody. You have QA, you have product owners, you have business owners. They're all contributing into like, what is that feature going to look like? What's it going to be?
Yeah.
And so that does create the best environment for, building great products. And so we like to spend a lot of time in that planning exercise and making sure we're really exploring that, getting the creative juices going. So that's one thing I would really explore with someone, is like, hey, what does it look like to be engineering ready with a unit of work, right? And show me what that looks like. So I would definitely explore that and see if you're comfortable with it. And then the third thing I would be like, so like, what's my role in that?
Right. That's what I would be wondering. Like, sometimes I've got these great ideas, but I don't know the ins and outs of software engineering. And I can't imagine people who hire the exact ins and outs of what they can and can't do.
Yeah. And so you want to know like what your role is and what your commitment to that is, and that's been something that's actually sometimes difficult for us too, because the customer's like, well, I thought you were going to be able to solve all those questions. And we're like, yeah, but the market. And so we can't solve some of those questions for you, because we don't live and breathe your world and your market and what your customers and what those ideal customers are looking for. And so you do have an involvement, but we're going to also do all these other things. And so that would be kind of my third question. I'd be like, let's really explore, like, so what is my role in there? And that way you go into it with eyes wide open, like, what's that time commitment? What's the expertise? Because basically the business owner or whoever it's going to be has to be the subject matter expert, is what we call it. So you're the subject matter expert, but we can be the scrum master, and we can be the engineering talent, and we can be designers, and we can be all these things, but we still do need a subject matter expert. And that's what your role is going to be. And here's what that looks like. So they can understand what those expectations are and how do they sign off on things when it's done, and they can walk through all of those things. So that's kind of those are three kind of general areas. I know they're not specific questions, but I would kind of go through communication patterns. How does work get ready for engineers? What does that look like? And then what is my role in the process?
What's my role in the process? All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that you've given us a lot of really good tips. I want to know, just as a final follow-up question, if you could give one piece of advice to somebody who was on the fence about hiring a software development company. What's that one piece of advice you would give someone who's kind of like right on the edge of they think they want to do it?
Yeah. So I think the piece of advice would be, as you're really trying to figure out who to work with, start with just smaller little engagements. So you don't have to bite off the whole thing. And you can always take your code base and take your things and kind of move to other engineers or do other things. So a lot of people get really scared about like, I have to be in a super long-term commitment relationship with this person. It's like, I'm going to get married, So like, what am I going to do?
Like, this is it. We're forever.
Scary. Yeah. Like putting the ring on. But what I do and what we actually encourage all of the clients giving us is like, hey, let's just start with a small planning exercise. So that might even look just like 8 or 10 hours, and we could do some design, we could do some prototyping, we can do some of that exercise when you're writing user stories and the acceptance criteria. Let's just pluck off one feature and spend a little time together. Now, you then will find out, hey, I like these guys, I like the way we work together, I like the team, I like what's going on here. Or you could be like, I don't feel like they really get it. I don't feel like they get my market. I don't think we're on the same page. I don't think they understand me. They're not as responsive as I would like, whatever it is. But start with something smaller and do like a planning exercise. And then you could even do like a small feature. You could be like, hey, let's just build that one feature and see how that goes. And so I would just kind of ease your way into things and make sure that you have things going. And to be fair, the organization and the engineers and your project managers are also really ramping up and getting familiar with you. Like, what do they like? How do they do this? Are they better at this? Are they good at that? Like, they're also understanding your market and your skill set. And like, so they're learning you, and they'll get smarter and smarter too about how to work together. Right. And so I would just start with something small, and then, the relationship can grow from there. So start with a date instead of a ring.
Perfect. Start with the date instead of the ring. All
Yeah.
right.
So I think that would make it easier for everybody.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy. I really appreciate you sitting down with us and kind of going over those questions. I think that it's going to be really helpful to people. And if you guys have any questions about Zibtek, we're going to have the information posted below. You can send them an email. You can just chat. Like you said, it's just a date. It's not a ring.
Sounds good. Thanks,
Thanks,
man.
Cash. Bye-bye.